Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Financial Dads Podcast. My name is Paul Fagan, and I'm here with Jody Fisher. Hey, Jody, how you doing today?
Hello, Paul. How's everything?
Doing well, doing well. This podcast is for all the dads out there who struggle with life's topics as they are related to family and finances. Our hope is that we can provide our thoughts, successes, and mistakes and share them with all of you. Today's topic, which is near and dear to my heart and probably to many of you out there, is the subject of retirement. How to get to retirement, how to plan for retirement, what to do within retirement, when to retire. There's so many questions that come up when it comes to retirement that I'm sure we're going to have several podcasts on this, Jody. But at the end of the day, today we want to discuss in general the subject of retirement. Now, my current situation for retirement, I hope to retire in my 60s. That's the current plan. I've been saving diligently along with my wife as best we can. I'll add to that, as best we can over the last 20 years, and I think we have another 20 years to go. And I think that retirement means different things to different people. My parents sort of retired. When I say sort of, there wasn't a defined benefit pension that was associated with their retirement. Their retirement was Social Security with a combination of some savings, which is always an interesting approach. But at the end of the day, they were able to retire okay at this point. My grandmother, however, her retirement is a little bit different. She retired with a pension, then took a job with a church and got another pension. So she's in her 90s now, and she has two pensions and a Social Security coming in, and a very low-key lifestyle at this point. So she's doing just fine with her pension.
That is a smart lady.
Very smart. I don't think she'll tell you that she wasn't as smart with certain aspects of her financial life, but when it came to retirement, I think that she did all the right moves, even if she didn't mean to.
A smart lady, what I mean by that is that she did what she wanted during her career and also simultaneously set herself up for prosperity in her retirement. That's what I mean by smart lady. I don't mean to imply that she might have been gaming the system or anything else. I mean she did what she wanted while she was working, and now she's able to do what she wants post work.
Yes, I think that's key. I think absolutely that's key. So I think everyone has a different approach and a different view of retirement. My personal view of retirement is probably four things. It's golf, going to the gym, doing yoga, and volunteerism. Those are probably the four key areas that I'd like to focus on when I retire. Of course, family, grandkids, hopefully, all those types of things that I think a lot of people who want to retire want to focus on. But if I had to pick the four things out that personally I'd like to do more of in retirement, it would be those four things. So Jody, what is your current situation in terms of retirement? How have you approached it? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think before I talk about my current situation, I want to jump off of what you just said about your priorities for your retirement as being, as you put it, golf, gym, yoga, and volunteerism. And it struck me right away what you said was, these are things I want to do once I'm not working anymore. And I think a lot of people's perspective on retirement stops at the perception of it's the perception of, so I don't have to work anymore. It's just getting rid of work. That's the definition of retirement, is I don't work anymore. And it almost seems like it's this aspiration to an absence of activity, which is not what retirement should be. And my mother-in-law just retired after years as a school teacher, and this is her first September where school's going back and she's not. And she's joking around. She's saying it's going to hit me on the second day of school. But I think that's really a great starting point to talk about retirement. Is it's not the absence of what you're not doing anymore, getting rid of the things you don't want to do anymore or don't feel obligated to do anymore, but it's planning for the things that you want to do. If you woke up in the morning and just had to do what you wanted to do, what would those things be? So to hear you put it in the way that you did, Paul, golf, gym, yoga, volunteerism, and it could be anything for anybody, that's really inspiring.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that we talked about at one point. I have a gentleman that I go to the gym with now. He's a doctor, Dr. Bruce. He's a surgeon, plus he also teaches spin class. It's quite the combination. But it turns out we became pretty good friends from a gym perspective. He went to the same high school as me, and we both went to an all boys Catholic high school, so we have this bond in common. But he put it best one morning, and I don't know how we got on the topic, but he said retirement is not about stopping work, but being able to work on your own terms. So I did talk about golf and gym and yoga and volunteerism, but maybe that might include some part-time work of some sort. Maybe it won't. I guess we'll have to see what happens. But I think tying into what you just said, Jody, it's really owning your retirement. Being able to be financially secure enough to have more options and more choices. And if you want to stop working, that's great. If you don't want to stop working, that's fine too. Or did I mix that up? So whether you want to work or not work, you have that choice. And that's what a good retirement plan gives you, is choice.
You're totally right. That's exactly where the emphasis needs to be, is availing yourselves of the options that you want to exercise. My current situation, and Paul, this is why I'm going to let you do most of the talking for this podcast, is this is one area of our finances where I am not so micro. And I talk a lot about being intentional with your money in terms of budget and what you spend and what comes in and what goes out. Our retirement has always kind of been there in the background. We've always been saving for it to a greater or lesser extent, and probably an emphasis on the lesser. We have IRAs, we've had various 401ks that have been rolled in. We participated in contributing. We've been contributing and participated in matching plans and all that kind of stuff. But I will admit that I am not as healthy in my retirement savings regimen as I am in the rest of our financing and budget. In fact, I've talked about this on prior podcasts that I even chose to use part of my IRA that I had put away to start up the business that I run now, and gave me the financial runway to get up to speed in running what goes on now. And I think in terms of a concept of retirement, the way we see it, I'm not sure, like you said, if I'm ever going to stop 100% working ever. I don't see that in my personality. I think I'm always going to want to be doing something. And again, my personality, I'm always going to want to be getting paid for it a little bit. I don't think I'm ever going to want to just sit back and get pension checks or Social Security checks. I don't even think our generation is going to collect Social Security, frankly. But that's a separate podcast.
Yes.
Because I think that my biggest income tool is still my ability to generate income. When you run your own business, even to the degree that I run my own business, I work for a firm, but I'm in charge of a department in terms of generating new business and billing new business. I have to make sure that the money's always coming in. And so I don't think that part of my personality is ever going to go away. I'm always going to be looking and saying, oh, can I make a dollar there or a dollar here? Or, can I do something and bill someone for it? Even if that comes down to the things that I want to do in my spare time, like I'm a weekend warrior with projects around the house. Maybe I start woodworking or something like that. I get better at that and I build furniture, or maybe I do work at somebody's house or something like that. I don't know. Point being is I don't think I'm ever going to 100% stop working and quote unquote retire. And Paul, you talked a little bit about your friend Bruce. And I think that's really hitting the nail on the head these days in terms of, not necessarily stopping work, but working on your own terms to the degree that you want to do that. I think that's where we are. At least that's where I think our generation is now. I don't think we're going to retire the way our parents' generation retired.
Yeah, and we have some friends that probably will retire that way, the way our parents retired. There is a 10% of the populace that has that capability, right? Teachers, folks and friends of ours that have been at their firm 20 plus years, they still probably have some level of defined benefit that's coming to them. So you could factor that in. And for those folks, depending on the size of that benefit, it may be everything that they need. So their focus is not to look at 401ks and such. For me and my family personally, the focus has to be on the 401k. So my wife works for the federal government. There's no secret. Federal government employees, they have a defined pension. I don't think it's as, I'm going to use the word, lucrative or as valuable or as valued or as high paying as some of the other pensions that I've seen with local municipalities. But it's a decent pension. But it's only one leg of that stool that we have to count on in retirement. So for me, when I look at my financial picture, yes, we value the fact that there will be some level of defined benefit that'll be available, but that's only one part of the story, right? So for us, the focus is on maxing out our retirement plans within our own. So I have a 401k. She has the government defined plan. And contributing as much as you can into that 401k without making sure that you hit all the matches that are available to you. So there's a lot of matching that happens in corporate, and I think even with the government, if you put in $1, they match $1 up to a certain amount, and it depends on the percentage and where you work. But always at a minimum, take advantage of that piece, right? Because that's free money. And we could probably expand on retirement savings into another podcast that would be its own entity. Because depending whether you're an independent worker or an independent business owner who has an IRA, that's a self-funded IRA account, or you're working for the federal government or for a local government and they have their own version of the 401k plus the 401k standard that's out there in corporate America. And it's gotten a lot of bad raps. You really have to watch over your 401k because in terms of returns and fees and stuff, depending on the plan that you're part of, you have to fight that back. So you have to have an understanding of the fees that are in place that might erode your returns on your plan. So we'll get into that, I think, in another podcast, and we could talk about that more. But at the highest level today, my biggest advice that I tell everybody, young, old, people just starting out in the industry, contribute as much to your IRA as humanly possible, or your retirement fund or your 401k as humanly possible, at least up to the match, but maximize whatever that allowable yearly amount is, if you could afford it. Right? I wouldn't do it at the detriment of not paying off credit card bills or doing it at the detriment of not getting rid of your school loan. But I would say that max out as much as you can into that retirement fund, because that's really the only tax break that Americans get now in terms of being able to take money, put it aside, and assuming that you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in your retirement, you'll pay lower taxes on that pre-tax money later on. And once again, that's for another podcast to get into particulars on that. But the idea is to really just make sure that you're contributing. And that's one of the things I focus on, is just making sure I'm contributing.
I agree with you there. I mean, I think that I'm a big fan of sort of the concept of scale, right? And every dollar counts. And it's sort of like when you talk about charity, if everybody gave $1, we wouldn't have to worry about charities anymore. Same thing with your 401k contribution. Maybe you think you can't afford taking that 5% out of your paycheck every week. But if you start at the lowest amount you possibly can, $5 a week, 1% a week, whatever that number is, that minimal number is, start there and start to live without that piece of your paycheck. You'll get used to living without that little piece, and that little piece will grow over time. And then as you pay off other debts or do other things that you need to get done with your money, you can start to walk that little piece up, 1% to 2% to 3% to 4%. I know that the 401k program that I have at my agency, there's an you can do automatic walk-ups. Like every 6 months or every year, you can just program it to automatically bump up to the next percentage if you want to do that. So it can even be like a set it and forget it in a way. And if you're working at a place, for a long amount of time, you can walk from 1% up to 5 or 6%. And like you said, also be availing yourself of the corporate match over that time and amass a decent chunk of money in a very quick period. I wanted to ask you, Paul, since you have done a lot more thinking and work on this than I have, um, do you remember the first time that you started contributing to a 401k program at work, or if you can't remember the first time, is there a first occasion that you recall doing it, and how did you get started with that?
So for me, that's a good question. For me, I believe I started my retirement plan at my first company. I used to work for a company called Direct Media, and I was still in college back then, Jody. And I'm trying to think if after I graduated college, did I start? I probably started immediately after I graduated college, that 401k. I think I'm trying to remember now if you had to be a certain age, but I knew that putting money aside was going to be key. So I think I did it as early as my new job. If it wasn't before I graduated college, it was right after. And then ever since then, what I used to do was take the money and roll it to the next company, to the next 401k. So when I left Direct Media and I went to my next job, I rolled the money into their 401k. And then when I left that job, I rolled it into the next company's 401k. And then at one point, another mutual friend of ours, which I wish we could get an interview with him. I don't think he'll ever let us interview him, Jody, but we know who he is. He's brilliant when it comes to money. He said, Paul, what are you doing? Stop rolling this money from 401k to 401k. Put it into an IRA. And I said, well, what's the difference? He goes, the difference is astronomical in terms of investment choice and control over the money. And he was right. So when you leave a company and you have a 401k, the optimal thing to do is instead of rolling it into the next company's 401k, which might have 15 or 20 funds to pick from, you roll it into an IRA where your investment choices are unlimited, and you can have complete control over the buying and selling within that portfolio in that account. And he was right, and that's what I've done ever since. So when I left my old job recently to go to my new job, I did that exact thing. I called the company that I deal with, and I said I need to put this money, and I have a rollover. They call it a 401k rollover, and I roll that over into my IRA account. And the IRA account keeps building, but I always take the new 401k fresh at the new company. But to kind of circle back to the beginning, I believe at the beginning that making some level of investment in myself, in my retirement, was important. And even at a young age, I remember the carrot being the free money, the matching. So if that company matched 4% and it was if it was dollar for dollar for $4,000, they would match a $4,000. It would be $8,000. So I think that was key. And for
Yeah,
those
that's a big carrot.
yeah, it's a very big carrot. So it's something that you want to take into account is make sure you always hit the matching. So with that, I always wound up just making sure that whenever I got to the next job, that I would max out the 401k. I think that there were a couple of times as I was starting out in life, I didn't max it out completely, but I know definitely once my school loan was paid, my undergrad school loan was completely paid off, I made sure that my retirement was at 100, whatever the maximum amount is you put in. And that was always key. And I know for those out there, maximum might be a tough number to swallow depending on income levels. For us, I've been lucky and grateful enough to be able to put away the maximum amount allowed by law every year. But realistically, it's going to be hard to retire, I think, completely if you don't make those types of moves. But I'm realistic. I know even with me making those moves, with the markets the way they've been and everything that's happened in the markets, chances are that won't be enough, even if you're maxing out your 401k. What are your thoughts on that, Jody, in terms of the market and growth and such?
Well, I got to be honest. I don't pay attention to the markets as much as other people might, and it sounds like you do. Um, I'm a long term kind of a person. I don't watch dips and lows and buy and sell. I don't hold any individual stock. We have our 401k, our IRA, and that's honestly about it. I'm a big believer in cash, and I think I'm a little cynical ever since 2008, quite frankly. I just don't. I don't trust anybody, quite frankly. I don't trust anyone on Wall Street. I don't trust anybody at banks. And so I like to keep, with the exception of our 401k and our IRA accounts, and sort of putting those things away like we've just talked about for the long term. I don't really pay attention to any of that stuff because I don't want to get wrapped up in it, because I could probably put an awful lot of energy. Knowing my micro personality, and if you saw my budget spreadsheet, you would understand what I'm talking about. I mean, it's detailed to the point of, your eyes crossing. And so if I brought that personality to the markets, I would probably do nothing else with my day. And I probably wouldn't get much sleep either. So I just take a long-term view. We do what we talked about here. I max out the 401k at work. And I started just by putting a little bit in, and I took the philosophy of like saving for retirement, or just saving money in, your 401k is kind of like going to the gym, right? You don't run the marathon the first day, but you got to start somewhere. So put that little bit in, took advantage of the max. So I'm doubling my money. Plus, don't forget that, that deduction you're taking out, that's less money you're paying in taxes on your salary that the government isn't banging you on in taxes. So that's a good thing too. Just putting that little bit away, even if it's not going to end up being the however many hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars you need to, quote unquote, retire and not work someday anymore. It's still going to be money that you're going to have someday. You're going to turn around and you're going to say, oh, I can use this. And I'll, again, use myself as a perfect example. I had a significant amount of money in that IRA account when it came time for me to make a decision about this business, this job that I have now. And I was able to use the money for that instead of my retirement. Now, yes, I took a huge penalty on it, but I did it intentionally and with eyes wide open. To me, same concept. I saved up money. I had access to money, and I put it to best use when I needed it. So there's the benefit of putting that money aside, starting as early as possible. And, you can listen to anybody who talks about doing the math, over the course of 30 years, how much, $5 a week ends up being. So the advice I would think would be to just get started, take advantage of the match, and let it roll. If nothing else, just start it and let it roll, and, don't worry about it. And then see where it takes you.
Yeah, that's the perfect approach. And I think what you were saying about not watching the markets, I could take a lesson from your page. I don't watch them that intently. I used to when I worked heavily. At one point, I was working in banking, and I'm a technology manager by trade, supporting traders and supporting finance folks. And they were watching CNBC and watching the markets and watching the screens all day long. So I would get caught up in that. But to be honest with you, never successful in doing any of my own investing. It's always been something that I'm just not very good at. And that's one of the reasons why I have a personal financial advisor. So I use a firm that handles and looks at my account and handles my IRA account, but gives me advice on my 401k investing and such. And that's another podcast episode, finding the right financial advisor, which is key. And I think that for me, we'll jump into it in another podcast, but for me, I did pick a big firm that has a big group of financial advisors, simply because I've heard too many horror stories through different mechanisms, whether from TV or personal people, people telling me their personal story where they've invested with their guy, and then their guy didn't do the right thing and either stole the money or lost all the money, and there's no recourse. There's no fiduciary responsibility to make sure that there's insurance there to make sure that your account is safe. And that's one of the things that I will talk about in another podcast. Is I prefer personally to have my personal financial advisor be with a very, very, very large firm. So if there is any misappropriation, I have a throat to choke. If you are with one person who handles your money and he's your quote unquote guy, and that person disappears with your money, you're going to have a very hard time getting that money back. But I'm gonna switch gears here a little bit, Jody, and because I know we're jumping around today on this podcast, but this is all good because I think it's going to lead to a number of other podcasts. One of the ideas I wanted to touch upon before we close is downsizing and or moving in retirement. What are your thoughts on that piece? I know personally for us, we're thinking, or at least I'm thinking, that we would sell our home and downsize to another home. Whether that's in the same area we live now or another part of the country, that's to be determined. But I think my focus will be to downsize and move and take some of the equity that's been built up in my home and use that in retirement as well. What are your thoughts on downsizing and or moving?
I think it's just like anything else. I think it's a personal decision that everybody needs to make. I think in a general sense, it's a wise thing to do. You know, why live in more house than you need? And that's at any point in your life. You know, I've got a brother-in-law right now who has got a baby number 2 on the way with his wife. They live in an apartment. It's a 2-bedroom apartment. You know, they're itching to buy a house because they think they need a 3rd bedroom. And having been in that situation myself, you know, when we moved from an apartment to a house, even before we had baby number 1, I regretted moving so swiftly, and just sort of, you know, upsizing and buying a big house, and long term, you know, had to extricate myself from that. And you know, I want to say to him, you know, what the heck are you worried about? A baby takes up about 3 square feet of space. You know, don't jump and buy a big house so soon, so quickly. So same philosophy in reverse with retirement. You know, don't have more house than you need. Don't pay for more house than you need. Everybody's personal situation is different. Maybe you can't afford to move out of that house. Maybe, you know, you're underwater or whatever. Who knows? But I think long term, you know, be smart with your money. Don't pay more than you need to pay for anything. You know, we may downsize, we may not. I've joked with my in-laws about how I'm going to build a wing on their house and move in with them when the time is right because they have a pool and I don't. You know, it's, you know, so who knows what's going to happen in the future. I think we're probably about at least 10 or 15 years away from that.
Yeah, I think that's another podcast right there, is the whole downsize, because I remember that story and your situation, Jody, and I think that's something we should be able to elaborate on for an entire podcast, which has so much wealth of learning and knowledge within what you had done, that I think it's key to share that with the group, you know, share that with the group or share that with our audience. I think that would be something we should do. So I think we've got a lot of different topics that came out of today's podcast. Just a summary recap, the 2 things that I'm taking away, or I'm going to say to people out there, have that conversation with your spouse or yourself and chart out that high-level plan of what you think you want to do in retirement, when you might want to retire. At least have an understanding for your own sanity of what you believe retirement should look like. And especially if you have a spouse, have that conversation. You may be surprised in the conversation, and you may need to work on that conversation a bit, because you might not be on the same page when it comes to thoughts about retirement. So that's one piece of advice I could give. The second piece, which I think I overstated many times on the podcast today, is contribute to a 401k or your retirement plan at work, or if you're self-employed, just contribute to that plan to the maximum capability. I'd like to say for the max allowed by federal law. That's the mantra I follow, is the max by federal law. But max it out as much as your budget will permit. As you said before, Jody, every little bit helps. And for me, making sure that you just start and get that contribution in on a steady basis, and get started if you haven't started already. Any other details or any other recap or advice you want to give before we close out, Jody?
I think that's all great advice, Paul. I think the only other thing that I would say is 2 words: get started.
Perfect. That's a great way to close. Well, Jody, I thoroughly enjoyed our discussion today, and I'm personally looking forward to the next one. Thanks, everyone, for downloading our podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at financialdads@gmail.com or check us out on Facebook. Just go to financialdads.com. So with that, this is Paul and Jody reminding you, managing finances can be stressful, but that's why the Financial Dads are here to help you plan for success. Have a good one, everybody. Be well, and thank you.